The most dangerous man in 3 states could buy a hospital, a Senate seat, or a man's silence with a phone call. He could not buy back the 4 pounds his baby daughter had lost in 11 days. Every specialist swore she was healthy. She was dying anyway, and the woman who finally saw the truth was mopping the floor outside her door. The IV pump beeped, and Dominic Kessler broke a $1,000 chair against the wall. Nobody flinched. That was the terrifying part. 6 men in dark coats stood along the pediatric ward at St. Aldrich Medical Center on Kavanagh Street, and not one of them so much as blinked when their boss put his fist through drywall. They'd seen worse. What none of them had ever seen was the thing happening inside room 414, a 9-month-old girl named Sophie shrinking week by week, while the best doctor's money could import shrugged and reordered the same clean tests. "Say it again," Dominic said. His voice was very quiet, which everyone in the building had learned to fear more than his shouting. "Tell me my daughter is fine." Dr. Weller adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Kessler, her blood work is textbook. Her heart, her lungs, her scans normal. Sometimes infants have transient. She was 18 pounds. She's 14. Dominic set a photograph on the bedside table, a chubby, laughing baby from Easter. Beside it, the child in the crib looked like a candle burned halfway down. That's not transient. That's a countdown. He'd taken the whole floor by force of money, bought out the other patients, stationed his own men at the elevators, replaced the night janitor with someone he could threaten. St. Aldrich had become an occupied territory, sterile and silent under his rule. And still, the enemy was winning, and he couldn't see its face. Grace Holloway saw the chair fly. She was 31, a fill-in night nurse from the county pool, hired because the regular staff had started quitting once the men with guns arrived. She wheeled her cart past the doorway and did not stop and did not gawk. She only looked, one long, professional glance at the baby, and something in the set of her mouth changed. "Wrong ratio," she murmured, so low that only Dominic closest caught it. He turned. "What did you say?" "Nothing, sir." She kept moving. "You said ratio." He was in front of her cart before she took another step, and up close he was a wall, dark eyes, 3 days of exhaustion carved under them. "My daughter is disappearing in front of me, and you said a word." "Say all of them." Grace held his gaze, which almost nobody did. "She's losing fat, not fluid," she said. "A baby who's just sick loses everything together. She's losing weight like her body's being starved of something specific while she eats fine. That's not a virus. That's a mechanism." Dr. Weller laughed, thin. "She's a floor nurse. I did 4 years in pediatric field medicine," Grace said, still to Dominic, not the doctor. "I've seen starvation that had nothing to do with food." For a long moment, the ward held its breath. Then Dominic looked at the doctor he'd flown in for $11,000 a day, and then at the woman with a mop. "You," he said to Grace, "you don't leave this floor. Weller, get out of my sight before I help you." That was Tuesday the 14th. By Wednesday, Grace Holloway had a private badge, a folding cot in the supply room, and a baby whose weight, when she charted it at 3 a.m., had dropped another 2 ounces since dinner. She stood over the crib in the dark and did the math again, and the number was impossible unless someone wanted it to be. Grace didn't sleep. She built a wall of paper instead. By Thursday night, she'd pulled every feeding log, every vitals sheet, every medication timestamp from the day Sophie was admitted, and taped them across the supply room shelves like a detective's corkboard. She wasn't looking for a disease anymore. She was looking for a hand. The pattern surfaced at 2:40 a.m. Sophie lost weight fastest after the 10 p.m. feed every night. The 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. feeds barely moved the needle, but the last bottle of the night, mixed from the same formula, the same water, the same everything, was quietly killing her. Grace ran her finger down the column 3 times, her stomach going cold. Same recipe, different result. The only variable was who prepared it, and when, and whether anyone was watching. She checked the schedule. The 10 p.m. Bottle was mixed in the ward kitchenette by whichever aide had the late shift, but signed off every single night by the floor's supervising pharmacist, a soft-spoken man named Curtis Vane, who'd been part of Kessler's medical detail for 6 years. Grace photographed the whole wall with her phone and deleted nothing. At 1 a.m. Friday, she did something that could get her killed. She waited until the corridor camera panned left, slipped the master key she wasn't supposed to have into the formula storage room, and started reading labels. Powdered formula, sterile water vitamin drops, everything sealed, everything ordinary. She was about to give up when she saw it, a single tin of specialty formula, the hypoallergenic kind Sophie had been switched to on day 2, tucked behind the others. The safety seal was broken and re-glued. Barely, a hairline crescent where the foil had been lifted and pressed back. Her hands were steady. They always were in the moments that mattered. It was afterward they shook. She scraped a spoonful into a specimen cup, resealed the tin exactly as she'd found it, and turned to leave. The lights came on. Dominic Kessler filled the doorway, and behind him 2 men she didn't know, and every one of them was looking at the key in her hand and the cup she was trying to hide behind her hip. "Caught the janitor stealing," he said softly, "or caught the only person telling the truth." Grace didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. "Somebody's been opening this tin," she said, and held up the cup. "The one your daughter drinks from at night. The night bottle is the only one hurting her. I can prove it, but not if you have your men break my hands in the next 10 seconds, which is what your face is deciding." He crossed the room slowly, took the cup, looked at the tin, at the crescent of dried glue she pointed to, at the woman who had not looked away from him once. "Who?" he said. Just the one word. "I don't know yet. But whoever signs off on the 10p, M-Feed knows exactly why she's dying." She swallowed. "Mr. Kessler, the person poisoning your child is close enough to touch you. Close enough that you'd never suspect them. Which means you can't trust anyone in this building except the one person you were about to have thrown off the roof." Something cracked behind his eyes, not anger. Fear, naked and human, the first honest thing she'd seen from him. "If you're lying to me," he said, and couldn't finish it. "Then bury me next to her," Grace said. "But I'm not lying. Get me a lab that answers to you and no one else. We have maybe days." He stared at her. Then he took out his phone, dialed, and said 3 words that changed everything. "Move the lab." The results came back at 4:12 Saturday morning, and the technician's voice shook on the phone. "There's a compound in the formula," he said. "Thallium, trace cumulative. Undetectable on standard blood panels once it moves into the tissue. Mr. Kessler, this is old school. This is what they used a century ago because it doesn't show. Whoever chose this knew exactly which tests your doctors would run and which they wouldn't." Grace closed her eyes. She'd been right, and being right felt like drowning. Dominic set the phone down with a hand that had gone white at the knuckles. Then he did the last thing she expected. He walked to the crib, and this untouchable man, feared across 3 states, knelt on the linoleum and pressed his forehead to the rail beside his sleeping daughter. And his shoulders shook once, twice in total silence. Grace looked away to give him the mercy of not being seen. 6 years, he whispered. "Curtis has stood at my shoulder for 6 years. He held her at the christening." "We don't know it's him yet," Grace said gently. "He signs the sheet. That doesn't mean his are the hands." But she needed to know. And so, an hour later, when she should have been sleeping, she wasn't. She was flat against the wall outside the ward's back stairwell because she'd heard Curtis Vane's soft voice float up through the door, and he wasn't alone. "Can't accelerate it. The nurse is watching everything," Curtis was saying. A second voice answered, smooth, one Grace recognized with a jolt of horror. Dr. Weller, the specialist Dominic had fired 3 days ago and who had somehow never actually left the building. "Then let the nurse watch," Weller said. "The child stops breathing by Sunday night. It reads as sudden infant collapse. The grief breaks Kessler open, and a broken king can't hold a throne. His brother steps in. We get our territory back, our percentage, our lives. One baby and the whole board resets. He loves that girl more than anything on earth. The IV pump beeped, and the memory of $1,000 chair breaking against drywall felt like another life. That, Weller said, is precisely why it works. Grace's phone was already recording. Her thumb had moved on its own. 41 seconds, the motive, the timeline, the names, all of it captured. Sunday night. Less than 36 hours and Sophie would be gone, and it would look like heartbreak. She backed away from the door, one silent step at a time. She made it 4 steps. You should have kept mopping. Weller stood at the top of the stairs behind her, syringe uncapped, moving with the calm of a man who'd killed carefully before. Kessler's men are downstairs. His daughter is asleep. And you, he said, closing the distance. Air a temp nobody will miss. One little injection. Air embolism reads as a stroke. You people are so predictably fragile. He lunged, and Grace Holloway stopped being a floor nurse. She caught his wrist before the needle reached her throat, and the world tilted. 4 years of pediatric field medicine was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Before the mop and the county pool, Grace had spent 6 years pulling wounded operators out of places that didn't appear on maps. A combat medic embedded with a unit whose name she'd signed a lifetime of silence over. She knew where a body's hinges were. She knew how to make a larger man's momentum betray him. She turned his wrist inward, stepped through him, and the syringe clattered down the stairs. He swung, panicked and strong. She let the swing pass and put him into the wall, with a sound that folded him at the knees. He grabbed for her ankle. She dropped her weight, pinned the arm behind his spine, and drove her knee between his shoulder blades until the breath left him in a thin whistle. He bucked once. She rode it. The whole time her voice stayed nurse-level calm, the voice she'd used on dying 19-year-olds. "Thallium," she said. In an infant. "You looked at her at the christening too, didn't you?" He spat something and heaved for the stairs. She wrenched the arm a half-inch higher, and the fight went out of him like water from a cracked glass. He sagged, cheek to the floor. Done. The stairwell door burst open below. Dominic came up 3 at a time, gun drawn, 6 men behind him, and froze at what he found. Not the temp nurse crumpled and bleeding out, which is what Weller had promised the universe. Weller, instead, pinned and gasping under the knee of a woman who wasn't even breathing hard. He nodded slowly, like that was the first honest math anyone had shown him in years. Sophie stirred, opened her eyes and, for the first time since Grace had arrived, reached up and grabbed the collar of the most feared man in 3 states and laughed. Grace saw something break open in his chest that no bullet ever could. He offered her the world at breakfast on the 7th day. A house on Cresthaven Drive, paid outright, the deed already in a folder with her name spelled correctly. $600,000 a year to be Sophie's private physician. A car, he'd already picked it, a black Mercedes G parked downstairs with the keys in an envelope beside her coffee at the Bellwether Diner on 9th, the only restaurant in the city he trusted, where his men held the corner booths and watched every door. He slid the envelope across the table, like a man used to closing deals with objects rather than words. Grace turned it over in her fingers and understood with perfect clarity exactly what she was being offered. A cage. A beautiful, armored, gold-plated cage. "If I take this," she said, "I never work another county shift. I never live in an apartment nobody's watching. I never walk somewhere without a car following me half a block back. I belong to your world, and your world is the reason a baby had thallium in her bottle." She looked at him. "You're offering me safety by making me a possession. That's the only kind of safe you know how to give." Dominic didn't flinch. He'd been called worse. "But not truer, yes," he said simply. "It is, I don't know another kind." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn, a small human gesture in a man who moved empires with a phone call. "Everyone I've ever kept safe, I kept by owning the ground they stood on. My daughter is alive, because a woman with a mop refused to be owned. I'm not too stupid to notice the irony. He almost smiled. I'm just too far gone to fix it. For a moment they sat there, two people from opposite ends of the earth who'd fought back to back on a dark stairwell, and the thing between them was real, and it was dangerous, and neither of them was foolish enough to name it out loud. Stay a month, he said finally, not as a possession, as the only person in my life who's ever told me the truth and lived. Watch her get her weight back. Then the car's yours whether you stay or go, and so is your freedom. No strings. I give you my word, and I have never once broken it, which is the worst and the best thing about me. Grace thought about the 4 pounds, about the crescent of dried glue on a resealed tin, about 1 stubborn ounce at 4 in the morning. 1 month, she said. For her. For her, he agreed, and something like relief crossed the face that 3 states feared. So she stayed. Sophie climbed back 16 pounds, then 17, the laugh returning louder every week, grabbing at Grace's stethoscope and Dominic's tie with equal fistfuls of joy. The house on Cresthaven was easy to refuse and hard to leave. It had a nursery with a window that caught the morning, and a kitchen where, at 3 a.m., the two most unlikely people in the city passed a warming bottle between them in the dark, and learned that the other one wouldn't run. They talked, in those hours, not about the empire, about small things. The town he grew up in before it swallowed him. The 19-year-old she'd lost in a place with no name, the one whose eyes she still saw when a monitor flatlined. He never asked for the whole story of who she'd been before the mop. She never offered it. But he'd watched her put a killer into a wall without breathing hard, and he was not a stupid man. And one night he said, quietly, over the sleeping child, "Whoever trained you, I hope they know what they made." Grace didn't answer. She only tucked the blanket tighter around Sophie's shoulders and hoped, with everything in her, that they'd forgotten. They hadn't. On the 29th night, her phone lit up on the nightstand at 2:14 a.m. with a number she had not seen in 9 years. A number from the life before nursing. From the unit she'd signed a lifetime of silence over. 3 words on the screen from a name she had buried so deep, she'd almost convinced herself it was never real. "We found you." Her blood went to ice. She sat up in the dark, phone glowing in her hand, and the whole gilded cage rearranged itself around her in an instant. Because there was only one reason that Ghost would surface now, and it wasn't nostalgia. She had walked away from that world clean, she thought. She had traded a rifle for a stethoscope, a call sign for a name pool nobody checked, and somehow they had traced her here, to a Mafia king's house, to a nursery with a window that caught the morning. A second text arrived before she could breathe. "The man you're protecting has something we want. Deliver it or we take the child. You have until the girl wakes." Grace was on her feet before she finished reading it. She did not wake Dominic. That was the reflex the old life had drilled into her. Assess, isolate, control the ground before you make a sound. She moved down the hall in bare feet, past the guard dozing upright in the leather chair by the stairs, and she checked the nursery first because of course she did. The window was open. It had been closed at midnight. She'd closed it herself. Now the curtain breathed inward on cold air, and the crib. Sophie was still in it. Asleep, fine, one small fist thrown up beside her head. But on the mattress beside her, where a hand had reached in over a sleeping baby and chosen not to take her, sat a single object. A challenge coin. Dull brass, worn smooth, a unit crest Grace hadn't touched in 9 years pressed into one face. On the other, scratched fresh, 20 min. Front gate, alone. They could have taken the child. They'd stood over the crib and proven they could. And they'd left the baby breathing to prove something worse, that Grace's whole month of vigilance, all of Dominic's men and cameras and walls, hadn't stopped them for a single second. The cage had never been locked. Not to them. Grace picked up the coin. Her hands were steady. It was afterward they shook, always, and she did not have the luxury of afterward yet. She lifted the sleeping baby out of the crib, carried her down the hall, and did the one thing the old life would never have let her do. She woke the king. Dominic came awake the way dangerous men do, instantly, silently, one hand already moving toward the drawer. He stopped when he saw her standing in his doorway holding his daughter, and he saw her face, and every trace of sleep left him. "They got into the nursery," Grace said, low and level. "Past your men, past your walls. They didn't take her. They wanted me to know they could." She held out the coin. "This is mine from before. The war I told you was over." He took it, turned it in the lamplight. Read both faces. And Grace watched the human father she'd unearthed over the last month recede, and the empire builder rise up cold behind his eyes. But this time, for the first time, it didn't turn on her. 20 minutes, he read. Alone, he set the coin on the nightstand with terrible care. "That is not going to happen." "It has to," Grace said. "If I don't go, they come back, and next time they don't leave her. You can't outgun ghosts, Dominic. I couldn't tell you before because I couldn't tell anyone. But I know these people. I trained beside some of them. This is a debt with my name on it, and it followed me under your roof, and Sophie is in danger because of me. So I settle it. That's what I meant that first night when I said some things you settle alone. You saved my daughter," he said, and his voice cracked on it just once. "You think I'm going to hand you to the dark and let you walk out my gate to die, because your pride says it's your debt. It's not pride." Sophie stirred against Grace's shoulder, and she rocked her without thinking, the reflex of a woman who'd learned tenderness in the worst places on earth. It's the only math that keeps her breathing. You built this whole house to keep everyone safe by owning the ground they stood on. And it didn't work. It never works. The only thing standing between your daughter and those men right now is a woman with a mop who refused to be owned. She met his eyes. "Let me be that woman one more time." The silence stretched. Then Dominic Kessler did the second most impossible thing Grace had ever seen a man like him do. He nodded. "You walk out the gate alone," he said. "That's what they see." He was already dressing, already dialing, already becoming the machine 3 states feared, but bent now, for the first time in his life, toward following a woman instead of ruling one. "But you have never once been alone since the night you charted my daughter's weight at 3 in the morning, and you're not starting now. Wire in your ear. My people on every roof from here to the gate before those 20 minutes are up. And when your debt is settled," he crossed the room and very gently took his daughter from her arms so her hands would be free. "You come back through that gate. Both ways, you understand me. You come back." Grace looked at the baby in the arms of the most dangerous man in 3 states, safe, breathing, 17 pounds of stubborn, miraculous life she had pulled back from a poison no one else could see. And she understood that the storm she'd walked into St. Aldrich to stop had only ever been the first one, that the war she thought she'd left behind had been walking toward this nursery the whole time, that the man in front of her had just handed her his freedom, trust, real trust, the thing he'd never given a living soul, the same way she'd once refused to take his gold. 12 minutes, she said, glancing at the coin. "I need a dark coat and the storage room key you never took back." He almost smiled through the fear. "Kept it for you." Grace pressed one kiss to Sophie's forehead, warm and alive and hers to protect. Then she turned toward the door and the gate, and the ghosts waiting past it, steady-handed, a nurse is in the light, and something far older in the dark. The afterward shaking would come later, if there was a later. She stepped into the cold, and the storm closed behind her. Grace pulled a baby back from the edge of a poison no one could see, and walked straight out the gate into the war she thought she'd buried, alone. If this story gripped your heart, if you held your breath even once, do 3 quick things. Tap like so more people find it. Share it with someone who believes ordinary people can be the bravest of all, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Because Grace's past is at the gate, Dominic's whole empire hangs on a woman with a mop, and neither of them knows yet who's really waiting in the dark. Stay for it.